As our first panelist for today, we have, with 18 seasons at first, 10 times winner of the Regional Chairman's Award, and one of the 2022 Chairman's Award finalists from Penfield, New York. Let's welcome Team 1511 Rolling Thunder with the topic of sustainability. And I think with us we have Larry. So, well, Larry, welcome to Warm Up, and the floor is all yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Let's see. Everyone see my slides okay?
Yeah, we do.
All right. Fantastic. All right. So first of all, I just want to thank teams 1156 Under Control, 1868 Space Cookies, and 4400 Servotics for asking me to present today. Also, thank you to everyone that's watching this presentation today. So first, a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Larry Lewis. I'm the team leader for First Team 1511 Rolling Thunder. I'm also a senior systems engineer. So when I'm not doing first, I'm actually working in the engineering field. And going into this season, it'll be my 19th season of first, which is goes fast. So before we get started, I wanted to do a quick poll and keep this a little bit interactive here. So the topic is sustainability, right? What are some of the challenges that your team currently has with sustainability? I'd like to see that before we get going. So what you can do is go to the website that's at the top of the slide here, and it should give you a prompt, and we can kind of start to get an idea of what are some of the challenges that people have out there. I think that's funding. Any other ones? Energy, management, sponsors. All right, interesting. Ideas. Interesting. There's some other ones I hadn't anticipated, so that's kind of cool. Code. Okay. Money, sponsors. All right, that's starting to become a theme. Knowledge. Members. Oh, okay. Oh, it's starting to take the lead here. Team, health. Wow. All right. Interesting. Okay. Well, this helps because the good news is we are going to talk a little bit about members of the team. We're also going to talk about sponsors, the team in general. So mental health, I think, I'm guessing that's together. So that's an interesting one as well. Also a very important one. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about sustainability. So what does sustainability mean to first teams? And what it means is, at least by my definition, the ability for a team to continue to operate successfully for the foreseeable future. So let me unpack that a little bit. So continue to operate successfully means to be able to build a robot and compete in competitions year after year. So not just 1 year. Successfully is relative to your team, meaning your team needs to define what is successful for them. So that could mean putting together a robot for competition and attending one competition, or that could mean building a competition-winning robot and attending 5 competitions, and then the World Championships. So there's 2 different examples of what a team might consider being successful. Your team needs to determine what level of success you are looking to achieve. And that's really important when establishing the resources that your team needs, because a team that's only looking to attend 1 competition versus a team attending 5 competitions and world championships has vastly different needs. So keep that in consideration. Your team's definition of success should be revisited over the years to make sure it aligns with the goals of your team. So it is completely fine to start with something feasible now based on your resources and then raise your goals later when you secure more resources. The foreseeable future is also relative for your team. So do you want to ensure your team can operate for 2 years or 5 years, forever? You need to take that into consideration, how repeatable your resources are from year to year, and have a plan for the resources that are not guaranteed in future years. So if you don't know for certain that you're going to get a certain sponsor in the years to come, you need to come up with a plan for that and how you're going to deal with that. It's not an easy problem to solve, and this is team dependent, but by at least having a focus on them, you can try to anticipate what needs your team may have and be proactive about resolving those issues. So based on my experience, there are 4 main resources that teams need to be sustainable. And without any one of these resources, your team will struggle to operate. Students are obviously needed because the entire FIRST program is for them. So they need to build a robot and learn from experiences of being in FIRST. So if you don't have students, you don't have a team. Funding is required to purchase materials for the robot and pay for travel to competitions. So securing a good funding base is needed for an FRC team. A build space will be needed to hold meetings and build a robot. This can be at your school, a university, a community space. You just need to make sure it is a safe, welcoming environment for all the students and that it has the tools you need to build the robot. Finally, mentorship. So mentorship is also critical to a team because that is where the outside experience and skill sets come from to build the robot and manage a team. So the entire FIRST program is centered around professionals in their field spending time with students to teach them what they know and have the students apply it. So now that we have identified the resources, let's talk about what teams can do to secure these resources. So first, students. Again, to keep your team sustainable, you need to be recruiting new students. So some of the most obvious methods are to do robot demonstrations, especially if your school has like a club or activities fair within your school. That's a great way to advertise your team. Hosting robotics camps during your off season can get potential students interested in joining your team when they get older. So we've had success with offering up FIRST Lego League camps through our town's park and recreation organization to recruit students for the future. We also try to recruit students that are currently enrolled in technology classes at the school since they already have an interest in STEAM. So also never underestimate the tried and true method of just putting flyers up in your school. I know it seems simple, but just putting them up on the walls around your school can go a long way towards just letting the student population know that your team is there and that students have an opportunity to join your team. So with student resources, you want to create a pipeline of potential students. And this is important because that pipeline is what's going to eventually fuel your team. So it's important to establish teams at all levels of FIRST if you can. This gets students interested in FIRST while they're young and more willing to try out FIRST and pursue STEAM interests. And by the time they get to high school, most students have already determined what they are interested in, which is why it's important to establish FIRST programs at younger age groups like FIRST Lego League and FIRST Tech Challenge. Because if you think about it, all major sports have youth leagues to get children interested in that sport at a young age. It shouldn't be any different for FIRST. Maintaining students on your team is just as important as recruiting them. So retention is very important. you need to create a safe and accepting environment for all the students on your team. And I stress the all. Everybody should feel like they can attend meetings, be welcomed, and be a part of your team. This can be done by making sure that all your current students are welcoming and accepting of all the new students. And also make sure that your mentors are trained in how to create an accepting environment. So FIRST does offer up some courses for mentors to help them with this, and that can be found in the FIRST dashboard. Make sure you're including students in the planning of your team meetings. That way they can offer up suggestions on what interests them. If they're not interested in what you're doing, they're not going to continue to come out to your meetings. So we do this through our student leadership team. We plan our preseason meetings over the summer so that when we go into the preseason starting in September, we have a plan for the activities and we do things that are fun and that are interesting to the students. Establishing strong student leadership also keeps your team sustainable. Encourage your seniors to pick up a project that they can accomplish while they're on your team. That leaves a legacy for the team. For example, one of our students built a storage case for our pit setup that we use at competitions every year. And another one wrote a standard operating procedure for how to do video editing for impact videos. So these are examples of legacy projects that students have done that help our team continue to operate and are an inspiration for newer students to leave their legacy on the team. And also having students promote cross-training of other students is important for the exchange of knowledge from veteran students to newer students. For example, we have seniors pair up with lower grade students to work with them on any key role on our team that requires training. We have a student responsible for our team emails every week. When they are graduating out of that role, we have the graduating senior train the newer student on how to compose and send out our weekly emails. So that cross training is very important from your graduating students to your newer students. And that could also extend into build season with CAD on your robot or building your robot, things of that nature. So now let's move on to our second needed resource for sustainability, which is funding. So funding is very important, as everyone knows. Before you determine how much funding your team needs, you need to establish a budget. And that budget is going to vary depending on your team situation and what goals your team has. So again, talking back to coming up with a plan and what it means to be successful, that's also going to determine your budget. Your team's budget is also going to vary depending on if you are in a district or regional model, or if you're outside of North America. So first, let's take a look at the registration costs for teams in the regional model. And as you can see, one event does cost $6,000 to register for, and each additional event costs $3,000. So that's a lot of money right there. And then if your team is fortunate to qualify for championships, that'll be an additional $5,000. So assuming your team wants to do 2 regional events and championships, you're looking at $14,000. And even if you just did 1 regional and say you went to championships, you're looking at $11,000. So that's a significant amount of money that you need to budget for when you're coming up with your planning. My recommendation is to determine how many events you want to attend, not including championships, and allocate funds for that. But also make sure you save up money for championship registration, just in case your team does qualify. It is a lot easier to save up the funds and then not use them than try to quickly fundraise later in the competition season. So I have a question here. It says, do you have any advice for community teams not affiliated with schools, with most of the mentors being parent volunteers? They don't usually stay, their students graduate. What's the best way to get lab space? That's a really good question. I do talk a little bit about that later on. It's a tough one with community-based teams that are not associated with schools. I will get into that in a little bit, and maybe that'll answer your question. If it does not, let me know, but I'm going to be getting to that in a second here. District teams have a different registration and pricing model. So $6,000 gets you 2 district events with the option of adding additional events for around $1,000 or so. I guess also with districts, it varies from district to district, how much additional cost you have for doing additional events. District championships are $4,000. So if you're looking at the total cost for 2 district events, a district championships, that's $10,000. And again, if you're going to go to champs, that's another $5,000. So you're looking at $15,000 just based on that. And that's not including additional events. So again, if you're a district-based team, you just need to plan for this and at least have an idea what you're getting into. So now that we've talked about registration costs, there are certainly other areas of costs that need to be taken into consideration. And there are some assumptions I made for these budget estimates. I started with the first budget estimate. It wasn't quite adding up for me. So I took some of that and then I also added in my numbers based on just doing the math and also experience with running a team. I made some additional assumptions, say you have about 30 students on the team, 45 people traveling via flights, around 18 hotel rooms needed for the team, and let's say a charter bus for travel to one of the regionals or district event championships in your area. So if you're doing an event that's outside of your local area, you're going to need to account for that. For that estimate, I assume that your team would need a charter bus and hotel rooms. So as you can see, for a regional and district team, that's around $15,000. Outside of North America, it may be more expensive due to increased distances. Maybe your closest event is 10 hours away or more. That's going to be more cost, or maybe the hotel cost might be higher wherever the event is located. So I added a little bit more there. But my estimate could be a little high. Maybe your team might find lower travel and boarding costs where you're located. That's also possible. For the World Championships, for travel, I assumed most teams are going to be flying in. There's some that can probably bus in, but most of them are going to be flying. And I added in the cost of about 18 hotel rooms. Let's assume an international flight's going to be more expensive than a flight within North America. And again, these are just estimates, so lower cost flights could be possible. As you'll notice, travel usually makes up most of your budget. People always ask me, what's the most expensive thing of running a robotics team? And I always have to say travel. It's just the way it is. For the robot, I assumed the team would be building one robot, and not all the parts will make it on the robot because designs change and parts break in testing. So not everything's going to get used. Also, you may want to purchase additional parts for spares, which is always a good idea. And for international teams, it's probably going to be a little bit more due to shipping costs. And if you are ordering things with rush shipping or expedited shipping, it's going to be considerably higher than just doing like a slower delivery method. And my recommendation is only use expedited shipping if you absolutely need it, and instead try to plan ahead for what you may buy so that you can get it in time for assembly without having to pay more money for shipping. Shipping can very quickly eat up your budget when it comes to your robot. So keep that in mind. Make sure to allocate funds for team shirts and field materials for building a practice field for either development or testing. Even if you're building some of the game elements, you might have to buy lumber and other materials to make it. So plan for that. As you can see, it's not unreasonable based on all those assumptions that you might need funding for a budget around $80,000 to $140,000, which is obviously a lot of money, but I don't think it's unreasonable given the assumptions that were made here. And there are ways to reduce your costs by not going to as many events, or maybe you can reduce your travel expenses by attending events that are local to your team. Maybe you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to try to save money where you can. A lot of this is also team specific based on what you need to buy and how you're getting it. There is, you know, this is only one possible budget. I would encourage you to identify all the expenses your team has, create your own team budget. Make sure you account for all those expenses that are unique to your team. Maybe you need to buy new power tools for your team, or you need to pay for your build space, which I'll talk about in a second. Make sure you allocate funds for that. Now that you have an example budget, let's talk about how to raise funds for your team. So there are a few different funding opportunities that teams can pursue. Corporate sponsors are great because they usually provide larger sums of funding for teams. They are also great for mentor resources as well. Sometimes it can be tricky to obtain funding from a larger company. One way you can get help with that is to recruit mentors from within that company and then ask them to help advocate for you within their company to secure funding from the company that they are working for. So that's one way to kind of get somebody on the inside, so to speak, to advocate for your team and secure funding for your team. It doesn't always work, but it can't hurt. If you don't ask, it's automatically a no. Alternatively, some of the larger companies have foundations that provide grants to FIRST teams if they don't provide funds directly from their company. So they're like nonprofit organizations or foundations that get set up to promote STEAM activities like FIRST. Where do you find them? So FIRST has a fantastic website that allows for teams to search for grants. If you haven't checked it out, I highly encourage you to do it. Once you're on the site, you can adjust the filters to determine the grants that your team is eligible for. There's grants for returning teams as well as new teams. And you should check back periodically because new grants might be added over time, change from year to year. It takes a little bit of effort to apply for a grant, but generally it's worth it if you get it. FIRST also has a FIRST fundraising toolkit. It is probably one of the most overlooked resources out there, but it is absolutely fantastic. A lot of effort went into putting together this toolkit. This website is a collection of resources from teams in FIRST that takes you through the process of creating a fundraising plan, documentation, and a presentation. It also has fundraising examples that teams can use to get an idea of how to fundraise in their area. It's a fantastic resource also because it's a collection of materials from different teams in different situations. So they have materials for teams that are in urban or suburban or rural locations. This is important because certain opportunities for fundraising tactics may be available or work better in one location, but not another. It's important to understand the opportunities in your area and pick the approach that will work for your team. If you can, try to get your students involved in the fundraising efforts if possible. Now, I understand that not all teams are able to do that for a variety of reasons, but if you can, it will give them an appreciation of funding that they do receive, and it can teach them valuable business and leadership skills in the process. And also, companies are a lot more likely to give funding to a student that approaches them than an adult. especially if the student is passionate about FIRST robotics, and can tell them all the really neat things that they're doing in FIRST. Parents can also help out with discovering fundraising opportunities as well as mentors, and taking care of some of the logistics that students are not able to do. So if it's like depositing checks or just doing any of the legal side of things that sometimes adults can only do, that's where it's helpful. Oops. So again, fundraising is a team effort and everyone should be involved in this effort. What about unexpected expenses? These always pop up and there is a way to deal with it. So, we have our budget now, we have some fundraisers identified that our team can use as funding sources, but sometimes your team may have unexpected expenses. And it could be travel related. I know for us last year when they said there's only going to be one championships and it's going to be in Houston and we're based in New York, that was a challenge for us. Like we did not expect that. So that was something that we had to deal with. It could be robot related. You went down a certain road with your design, didn't work out. You have to buy a bunch of new parts to go down a different path. That happens as well. You need to plan for that as well. So these are all challenges, obviously, to your team's budget. The easiest way to deal with unexpected expenses is to have an emergency fund. And that's not just in robotics, that's also in life. But if you can plan ahead and say every year, if your team has any surplus funding, make sure to save that and put it into an emergency fund and make sure you kind of keep your hands off it for emergencies. That is beneficial to your team to deal with these unexpected expenditures. So ideally, it would be good to have a full year's budget worth of emergency funds, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But here's why. What if your major sponsor stops funding your team? Like, oh no, what are you going to do, right? Or you take a big trip to championships like we did last year. Like that was a major hit to our budget. You're going to need that reserve emergency fund to help cover those costs. And it can take years for a team to save up funds. We built ours over the course of, I want to say like 8 years. And we've had to dip into it as of last year. But if we didn't have that, we would have been in a lot of trouble last year. So it's okay that it grows slowly over time and that you have it in case of emergencies. And that is the best way to deal with unexpected costs. But what if you haven't had the chance to save up enough money for your emergency fund? Well, that is when you need to start to be looking at low effort, high revenue fundraisers. And what I mean by that is our team, as an example, does a car wash in the spring. And it doesn't cost us much in materials. But if we have like a good day, good weather, and a good turnout, we can make about $1,000 in 4 to 5 hours. So for maybe $10 in materials or donated soap, so maybe no money, we can make a lot of money in a relatively short duration of time with the students' involvement. So that's what you're kind of looking at when you're in a I need money quick sort of situation. Sometimes like pasta dinners can do that for you, barbecues, things like that, things that where the consumable costs are low and inexpensive and you can yield a bunch of money quickly. Alternatively, if you are in the middle of competition season, I understand that it's hard to take time away from building the robot or working on the robot. So you need to do something that's a little bit more passive for your people's involvement. That's when you're going to start looking at things like crowdsourcing, like GoFundMe pages. But depending on how well you advertise the site, can differ in how well it does. So you really do need to make sure you're advertising it well on a lot of different channels. My one caution with them is that you don't do it all the time. So don't have a page that's up there forever, because people tend to donate more when there's a sense of urgency in the cause and some sort of emergency need. So if you have it up there all the time, you lose that, and it's probably not going to do as well. It might do good initially, but then it's going to eventually not get too much in return. So last year, when we were short on funds for champs, we used crowdsourcing site to help cover our expenses. But it was the first time ever we had done that. And I think that because we'd never done it before, combined with a sense of urgency, it actually did okay, and it helped us out. Finally, you can ask your school to see if they have any funds. Now, I understand for community-based teams, that's not an option. I hate to say it, even being a school-based team, we don't get any money from our school right now. So we have to do all of our fundraising externally, or our funding comes externally. So you may not get money from them for a variety of school policy reasons, but if you don't ask, you don't know. So it's probably worth at least asking and seeing, like, are they willing to provide any funding? Funding is certainly an important sustainability topic, and it's one that could be its own presentation. Like, I could go on and on about this, and we could certainly get into more details. But it's also very broad, and every team's circumstances are going to be different depending on where they're located. So my one, I guess, big thing is just be persistent with it. Try new things to figure out what works best for your team. So over the years, we've tried many different fundraisers. Some worked, some absolutely did not work. But it's okay, because we didn't know until we tried it. It's just like prototyping for your robot. So you don't know unless you try something. It might work, it might not. But you'll learn something either way, and you can refine your fundraisers to make them more efficient. So the next sustainability topic is build space, which was more popular than I thought it was going to be today. So this is exciting. So you can't build a robot if you don't have a place to build a robot. Your build space should be a safe space that allows you to efficiently build a robot. It does not need to be perfect, but it should have a work area big enough to put together your robot, and have some storage for your tools and robot parts. Our first year, we were in a wood shop that we shared with the technology department. So after every night, we had to take all of our stuff, clear off the benches, and clear out the shop, and put it in a small closet, like a broom closet. And that's how we operated our first year. We worked out of the hallway at times, just because there's a little bit more space to move. It was all hand tools. We didn't have any real power tools other than maybe a drill. But over the years, we worked with our school to get more storage. And when the opportunity to renovate the technology wing occurred, we were taken into consideration as part of the design plans, which gave us better work space and also more storage. So don't give up. Be patient, be persistent, keep the communication channels open with the school administration if you're working out of a school. Because even if your build space is not ideal initially, it may be long-term. So keep that in mind. If you can, try to secure a build space that doesn't cost your team any money. This can be a challenge, and it may not be possible for some teams, but if you can do it, it will save your team lots of money. Your site will most likely need insurance for the people working on the robot. So if you're in a school and you're affiliated with a school, this is usually covered by your district's insurance policy. If you are a community-based team, you may need to purchase insurance, most likely. And this should be a part of your team budget. So you need to factor that in. If you are a community-based team, and I know there was a question about this earlier, you may still be able to use a local school for your build site. So many districts allow for outside organizations to use their facilities. You just need to fill out a facility usage form and possibly pay a small fee to get access to using the school. You may not get storage or access to tools, so you might have to develop a way to store when you're not meeting, but at least you'll have a centralized location to build. Again, not ideal, but it's an option to kind of get by. And I know, at least for our school district, other community-based organizations like the Scouts, even I think there's like a knitting club. There's a bunch of different outside community organizations that utilize our facility. So that is an option. Community centers are also a possibility. So our Park and Rec department has a community center that anybody can sign up and use. Again, there might be a form and there might be a small fee, but you can use it. And many communities welcome outside organizations to conduct meetings, are supportive of STEAM initiatives like FIRST. So there's a couple options. If you can get a company, maybe your sponsor has some space, or reach out to property management companies. So think of like in some of the shopping malls or some of these different store complexes, they may have some space that's for rent or lease that nobody is occupying. You can ask them to see if they would be willing to donate the space for free. You recognize them as a sponsor, they give you a build space. It works out pretty well. It's a good opportunity for your team. You're most likely going to have to cover insurance, and they may ask you to cover utilities, but it could work out great. Some teams have been able to land that. The one risk that I've heard of with teams that are able to secure locations like this for free is that they may ask you to leave the space in the future for business purposes. So if they have somebody that's willing to come in, a new store wants to come in and they want to pay the full rate for that space, they're most likely going to ask you to leave that space. So you can't get too cozy where you are because you might have to vacate the space. But if you're really, looking for something soon and you need it right away, the risk may be worth it so that you can get a space than to not have one at all. So that's an option. Finally, and this applies to both community-based teams and school-based teams, you could have your team lease a space or rent a space. This is the most expensive option, but what it does is it does secure your site for the lease duration. There are some teams I know that combine their funding to lease build sites or practice facilities. They share the space. So this could be one way of bringing down your team's cost while still taking advantage of the new build space that's being offered. It can be a very beneficial situation because you also don't have to adhere to your school's hours. So maybe they don't allow you to be in there a certain time of day because you're leasing a space. You basically can go there whenever. And the other benefit is if you do have other teams going in on it, you can learn from them and practice with them. So there's definitely benefits to having it. But again, it usually is at some financial cost in order to do it. Another option, you might be able to negotiate a lower rate if you give them partial sponsorship or something. But try to contact some of these property management companies. That's an option. Ultimately, you should secure a safe, welcoming build site. And you can always reevaluate your team's build space as your team's needs change and your definition of what it is to be successful and sustainable changes. You can always reevaluate that. I don't know if that answered your question 100%. The question disappeared. Let's see here. Let's see, database. Yeah, I think that did it. Yeah, so I think there's at least some options there for how to find a build space. Again, it's very situational depending on where your team is located. So you're going to have to reach out to local organizations and property management companies to figure that out. If there is any follow-up questions from any of the community-based teams, just let me know and I'll address them.